That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the Only Human podcast. I'm Tony Kern again, and I'll be your host today as we walk through one of my favorite subjects, mastery. Let's begin with burning a little incense at the altar of one of the godfathers on this topic, an author named Robert Greene. That's Greene, if you want to look him up. What he did was he examined the habits and behavioral attributes of highly accomplished artists, scientists, and other remarkable people. His book is simply titled Mastery, and it highlights the innate potential that's inside of all of us, right? And he, among others, and we'll be talking about another author here in a few minutes, says that there's a proven path to success and mastery, and it's achieved by taking care of the little things, mastering the essential skills in any given area. And the pathway is relatively simple, but it's certainly not easy. So let's get going and find out what it's all about. Here's the deal, though. If you want something bad enough, you can have it. So let's anchor our discussion with the Blue Threat Proverb of the Week. And this week, it's number 6, practice makes permanent. We're going to talk about the Blue Threat Proverb in just a second, but I wanted to take a moment to tell you, because we go over one of these every week, right? I wanted to take a moment to tell you that you can have them all. They're all inside a book I wrote about a decade ago called Blue Threat, Why Error is Inhuman. And the subtitle is How to Wage and Win the Battle Within. And I want to make it available to all of you. It's certainly available on Amazon, but I have a special request and a special offer here for you today. We're coming up on Christmas if you're watching this when we publish it. If you're watching it at a later date, then somebody's coming up on a birthday, right? Or something like that. Blue Threat's available directly through the publisher, and I've seen what Jeff Bezos drives, and he doesn't need the extra $4.83 he gets out of every copy here. So I'd prefer if you ordered it directly through the publisher. And I'm going to tell you the email you can send your request to, and I will provide you a signed copy of Blue Threat if you order it directly through the publisher, which is northslopepublications@gmail.com. NORTHSLOPE publications, make it all one word, at gmail.com. Send an email to them. They'll work out payment, and I'll get you a signed copy. It'll be there probably within a week of the time you order it. So back to Blue Threat Proverb number 6. Practice makes permanent. You know, we've talked about how powerful habits are in previous podcasts, and none is more powerful or more important than how we practice things that are important to us. Let's use an example of something I would really like to be great at someday, but I'm struggling to even get good at it. It's that wonderful and maddening game of golf. Excuse me. So I started playing golf about 20 years ago, really pretty late in life, to try to master something as difficult as this game is. In the economic strata that I grew up in, golf wasn't something I could afford to play. But I thought I was a bit of a natural athlete, and hitting a little ball around open spaces seemed like it was something I could do, and everybody seemed to have fun doing it. So back about 20 years ago, I bought a set of secondhand clubs and started playing. And I quickly realized that this game was really something different than anything I'd ever attempted to master before. And I'll tell you how I lowered my handicap fairly significantly in just a minute, right after a word from this week's sponsor.
The COVID pandemic and its aftermath exposed numerous gaps in everything from supply lines to healthcare. On the personal level, we've all felt it in an overall decline in mental health and well-being, whether in ourselves, our loved ones, or friends and coworkers. No one has been spared, but some have bounced back much faster than others. Why are some people better able to bear their accumulating burdens and daily stresses? It's because they've transformed their life experiences into psychological strength. The good news is that you can do this too. Just like physical muscles, we can develop our mental resilience, toughness, and agility if we know how. Welcome to the gym. Armor Knight Psychological Strength Building is a program that will show you how to begin building those mental muscles, armoring you to better deflect the constant barrage of mental arrows that wear you down. Join us on our website at convergentperformance.com and click the link for e-learning to sign up for this exciting program today.
All right, so back to the links. I read a lot of books and I watched a lot of videos, all of which seem to recommend expensive lessons and equipment upgrades. You know, my economic situation had changed a bit since I was a kid growing up in the government housing projects, but not enough to invest that kind of money in something I wasn't sure I really even wanted to do yet. So I kept reading and I kept looking at those videos, and I found that they had a pretty good recommendation that seemed to make sense to me, and that was to get out on the practice range a lot more before you went out on the course. That was something I could afford, so I headed out onto the course and I bought endless buckets of balls. And I whacked them all down the practice range, seeing how far I could hit it, et cetera, et cetera. And nothing got better. Till I ran into an old timer, a retired general officer at the Air Force Academy golf course. I think it was a silver course I was on. And he pulled me aside and he said, all I was doing was practicing bad habits. And unless I stopped doing that, I was doomed to being a hack golfer forever. He said, aim for something. Put all those clubs away, take one club and hit a couple bucket of balls, aiming and refining what you're doing with that single club at that single distance. I said, Jesus, take me forever. And he goes, yeah, where are you going today? He says, forever leads to nowhere unless you aim for somewhere. And I always remembered that. And so I started aiming for something. I stopped whacking the heck out of a bunch of balls. And slowly but surely, I began to realize that I was figuring some things out. And that was right about the time when I came across some behavioral science on performance. And I'm telling you, it changed everything for me. It was called deliberate practice. And it was the brainchild of a guy named Professor K. Anders Ericsson at Florida State University. He just passed a couple of years ago. He studied people who had become the absolute top in the world, number ones at something. He initially looked at musicians and chess players because they were easier to study mathematically. He didn't have to, there's some ways that he could study that and see how their performance improved or didn't improve. And so he began to form what a social scientist call hypotheses, right? Guesses as to what might make the best in the world the best in the world. So the questions he asked were the following. Did they come from parents who were also skilled? Right? Was this genetics? Right? Were these people really smart? He looked at intelligence. Were world-class performers simply smarter than their competitors? And then he looked at the one that he thought he was going to discover to be true. He looked at the amount of practice they put in. And here's the deal. None of that seemed to matter. And he was really getting frustrated. In fact, his favorite hypothesis, they must practice more. He found that those at the absolute very top of their competitive world actually practice less than their second-tier performers. And that really made no sense until he decided to look at something different. He decided to look at how they practiced. And the rest is the stuff of high-performance legend. K. Anders Ericsson and deliberate practice. Ever since I stumbled across this and began to operationalize it for my own world, I've been a disciple. So what is it? Deliberate practice is a special kind of practice where you break a skill down into its component parts and then you perfect them one at a time. It's a very specific type of practice, not based on repetition, although repetition is required, but the amount you practice doesn't matter. It's really focused, excuse me, on intensity to continuously improve in one small specific area at a time. And best of all, it's done inside the game itself or the work itself or life itself. So what I'd like to do today is walk us through the 5 steps of deliberate practice in a little bit of detail, and I'll reflect back on my golf game a little bit, and I apologize for that, but it's what made it real for me. So let's see how all this works. Step 1 is an academic step. You have to learn as much as you can about what it is you're trying to improve. So for my golf game, I had a little bit of a head start, right? I had all those videos I'd watched and books I'd read, but I was all over the map, right? I was looking for the one secret, right? The easy path. Was it a grip thing, right? Or was it a backswing thing? Well, it turns out that it's all of those things, right? I had to break it down, right? The grip, the stance, the backswing. All of these things are a part of the whole. And in order to begin deliberate practice, I had to understand them all. Eventually, I had to understand them all. But right now, I only had to understand one. So I began with where a lot of people begin with the stance. How do you stand up and whack a golf ball? And from there, I moved on to some other things. That's very difficult. So that first step of deciding what small part you want to learn, as soon as you learn it, you go, well, I'm going on to the next thing. I want to study the grip. I want to study, how to change the club facing so I can intentionally hit draws and fades instead of hooks and slices. So you have to have the mental discipline to learn one thing at a time and then go out and practice that one thing at a time until you can get no better. So how do you go from this first academic step onto the second one, which is pushing beyond your comfort zone? In anything, if you want to get better, you have to stretch. You have to stretch your goals. You have to stretch the techniques of your practice. But these goals are all small goals. And it's maddening to not be good at something when you're used to being good at just about everything. Remember, we're not trying to be good here. We're trying to be great. We're trying to be everything that we're capable of becoming. So you really have to push yourself beyond what you usually accept from yourself. And these special kinds of goals that we fully understand but are not yet capable of doing leads us to the next step, which is step 3. We begin to practice against these well-defined, very small, specific goals. But there's nothing there to show us how to do it, right? We don't have a manual. We have some ideas, Jack Nicklaus does this and Tom Watson does that, or whatever it is. But here's where you begin to make it personal, right? Until I got my hip replaced a couple of years ago, I had one leg that was 1.5 inches shorter than the other. Surgeon fixed that for me. But I had to deal with that, right? I had to deal with, how much flexibility I had, all those things. It had to fit me, right? When I approached a golf ball or any other part of a deliberate practice task, it has to be unique to me. So going out and finding what everybody else is doing, while informative back in step 1, is kind of useless in step 3 as we begin to actually do this thing called deliberate practice. So you have to experiment, which is a blast, right? Except when you experiment, think of Thomas Edison and how many light bulbs didn't work. What you're going to come up against is a lot of things that don't work. And that's very, very frustrating. But you have to have that mental discipline and perseverance during step 3, working toward well-defined specific goals, to become comfortable with failure, remember what didn't work, and move on and try something new, right? And eventually, when you become comfortable with failure being success, which is, okay, I know that doesn't work, so let me try this, right? By keeping track of those smallest things, we stumble upon things that work a little bit better, and then a little bit better from there. And so we toss out all the things that don't work for us. We find the thing that works for us as unique individuals, and then we build upon that. And it's easy to forget what all this is and go back to just whacking balls down the field and say, I'm good enough, this is too hard. But if you stick with it through step 3, you're going to be able to begin to see real progress. And when you begin to see real progress, you start that flywheel. It becomes fun, right? and you're well on track. And it takes you to step 4. As you begin to integrate the small specific things, okay, I've got my stance down now. I'm going to work on my grip and then my backswing and then whatever else it is. As you begin to integrate them, you're going to find that these things are not separate at all. They're one unified thing. And so you have to continue that mental discipline and give yourself high quality feedback. That can be very tough. When you think about a musician or a world-class aerobatics pilot or an athlete, they've got tons of resources, and they have tons of external coaches and people analyzing videos using artificial intelligence and all that stuff. We don't have that, probably. Maybe some of you do. I certainly don't. And so what we have to do is we have to provide our own brutally honest feedback, realizing that it's probably, no matter how brutally honest and objective we are, somewhat flawed and biased. All that does, though, is it slows down the progress you're going to make, but it doesn't stop the progress you're going to make. If you had perfect feedback, made the perfect adjustment, step forward would go really, really fast. But as you begin to integrate these small specific goals that you're getting better at by giving yourself the best feedback you can, modifying what you're doing a little bit, and then growing from there, you've taken the next turn on that flywheel. Now it's really going. So first 4 again, you study it, right? You decide to push past your comfort zone. You're not good enough. You want to get better. You break this thing down. You begin to actually practice these specific goals. And when you get really good at one, you add the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And along the way, you're giving yourself all of this great objective feedback. And that leads to step 5, which is really the outcome more than a step. But you develop a very unique, personalized mental model of what expertise looks like for you on this task. And that becomes how you operate. Now you've truly achieved mastery with the skills and everything that you've been given and developed on your own. And as long as you continue to operate at that level, you will keep getting better from every single experience. So that's the steps of deliberate practice. Like I said, it's relatively simple, but it is not necessarily easy, right? So I would challenge you to think about how you employ deliberate practice, what you want to employ it on, and make it something fun. I'll come to that here in just a second, because it is a labor of love. If it becomes a labor, if it's just work, you're not going to stick with this very long, because it's exceedingly frustrating unless you really, really want to get better at something. Now, having said that, once you've done it in one thing, you can apply it to another thing that might not be as fun. Right? Things as simple as, for me, writing the perfect paragraph. Sounds like something an English teacher would teach me. But when you write fiction and nonfiction, you don't want a formulaic approach, right? You want something that sounds like you, something that is authentically you. And so when I began to apply what I learned from golf into writing a perfect paragraph, I started seeing so many things that spoke through my voice that I could begin to capture and refine in the same 5-step process. And from there, it became much easier each time I employed it. So deliberate practice, when I talk about the metaphor of a flywheel, that's exactly what it is. Once you get it going inside of any particular task and you get closer to the end, you're going to see the benefits and it's going to motivate you more. Once you've gotten really excellent as you can be in one given area, it's easier to migrate that same learning process to another. All right, I guess it's time for takeaways here on deliberate practice. Look, I'm not a great golfer yet, but I'm much, much better than I was 20 years ago. And I am also still getting better, even at my advanced stage of life. And furthermore, I've put these steps into practice in my personal and professional life in so many other areas over the last 20 years. I've done a host of things I never would have thought I could accomplish. And I'm a humble guy here, but I mean, I've started a business and run it for 20 years. I've written 8 more fiction and nonfiction books, soon to be 9. Even this podcast was difficult, but I applied this deliberate practice process to it. Each of these things, for me at least, are a direct response to putting the principles that I just explained to you in play. So as we move forward, talking about a host of other learning opportunities and human performance improvement opportunities over the next few weeks, months, and hopefully years together, I will continuously reflect back on this deliberate practice model. It's we stand on the shoulders of 2 giants here. I mentioned K. Anders Ericsson, who started the work on deliberate practice. For those of you that want to learn a little bit more about it, look him up. But then the second one, of course, that we talked about was Robert Greene, who wrote the book Mastery and took many of these principles into it and expanded upon it. There are a host of other people, including myself, that have written and refined on how these different things work, but you can get pretty wonky and nerdy if you're not careful here, and we don't want to do that on this podcast. So until next week, I encourage you to keep striving to get better in all the ways that matter to you. Remember, we get one life. Let's squeeze it for all it's worth. See you soon.